So good morning, everybody. I think we start. We have covered some points on the agenda, so I start already with a small introduction. Yes, with a very interesting subject, so it's always subjects, items that we get also from the members of the intergroup. So this was one of those suggestions, so speaking about animal welfare labeling, voluntary versus mandatory, and for a long time it's also a demand from the consumers because they wish to be better informed on animal welfare conditions that exist for some products. For example, we have it already now regarding eggs. However, when it comes to other products, it is merely on a voluntary basis. It's not very clear. It's not often related really how the animals were reared up. So there is no EU harmonized system, and consumers are unable to understand and differentiate now between these different claims proposed. It is the objective today of the intergroup that we join really our forces together with the Commission to figure out how best to pull EU citizens out of the dark and into the light when it comes really to animal products that they are consuming. Later on, I think he's on his way to us. We are also going to have Pascal Durand joining the intergroup. He will also have to tell you some things. Then we will have Mr. Denis Simona. He is senior expert, head of animal welfare sector from DG Santé. We have Mrs. Claudia Salzborn. She is expert at the Academy for Animal Welfare of the Deutscher Tierschutzbund. And then at the end today, we are also going to have a proposal from my colleague Sarah Wiener. So we will listen now first, as I see that Pascal Durand is not there yet. We will first listen to the presentation concerning animal welfare labeling, and then also, of course, we open after each presentation also the floor for questions, remarks, and of course also answers. And then, as I said, Sarah Wiener will come with a very interesting proposal also. But let me just have few important, or mainly two important communications I want to make. First of all, on the 29th September at the European Parliament and in Brussels, we will be hosting an intergroup site event chaired by Petras Austrevicius, as the chairman of the intergroup working group on companion animals. And this event will concern the responsible population management of cats and dogs. So note, save the date, please, 29 of September in Brussels, a side event of the intergroup. And then the next intergroup session will be also very exciting and important event taking place on the 6th of October and concerning the current European Citizen Initiative for Free Europe. Before the start of the monthly meeting, there will be an action outside the Parliament where MEPs will have the opportunity to show their public support for this European Citizens Initiative. So the intergroup will then be meeting with representatives from academia, NGOs, as well as the film director from the recently released documentary Slay, of which we will see relevant extracts. So more details will be sent to you by my colleagues here, the Secretariat also of the intergroup and the intergroup via mail. Voila, so please save the date, these two dates, 29 and 6th of October. And then some information, as always, on this meeting today. This meeting will be streamed on Interaxio. It will be recorded, just that you are informed. And the video recording and presentations will be uploaded to the intergroup website afterwards. Voila. So I now give the floor. Is Mr. Denis Simona, is he there online? Is he? Yes, he is. So he's there remotely, and who will inform us now of the work on the Commission has carried out so far, and also the future plans they have regarding labeling. Mr. Simona, you have the floor, please. Good morning and welcome in the intergroup.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Chair. I will try to be short because I know that's very little time, and I will try to summarize what has been done, and also I try to focus also the debate on what you are interested in is voluntary versus mandatory. So next slide, please. Okay, the background. Okay, I'm not going to go very deep in this. The farm to fork strategy make a line on this animal welfare labeling. It's not a clear commitment because it's a bit considered, but it just that there is a sentence on this, so we are working on it. And there was, as a consequence, a first subgroup of the EU Animal Welfare Platform that provide conclusion in June 2021, and I think this is interesting for you to have a look of those conclusions. And much more late, I mean, a bit later, okay, I think there was the Inception Impact Assessment, which published different options on animal welfare labeling in July last year. So next slide, please. And furthermore, a study on animal welfare labeling was published in March 22. This is a data gathering study. So it provides quite an extensive, let's say, coverage of what is going on today in the EU in terms of animal welfare labeling. So I think it's quite an interesting study as a background. And then there was also at the same time a second subgroup of the platform on animal welfare labeling has been created, where all stakeholders are represented. And we have went through different meetings where we explore actually the options that has been presented in the Inception Impact Assessment. And at the same time, there is an impact assessment study going on animal welfare labeling that is planned to be concluded by the end of this year. Next slide, please. Okay. I think what is interesting in all this background is that the study that I mentioned, what was published in March, identified 5 key problems related to animal welfare labeling. One is the consumer coverage. It means that many consumers have no choice because there is no information. If I remember correctly, there's around 16 member states where there is absolutely no voluntary labeling or whatsoever on animal welfare, apart from the eggs, as you mentioned, Mrs. Chairman. But also, so there is, in many countries, no information on animal welfare, privately or not. Second problem is the information quality. Has been, as you said, the landscape, apart from eggs, is not harmonized. So there is plenty of initiatives, and there is no easy way for the consumer to compare welfare claims. They are very different. They have different methodology. And so there is really no common way to compare them. There are few examples where you have a comparison. So that is really a problem in terms of how the consumer can choose. There is also an uneven playing field, means that the other consequence, or I would say the related problem from an operator's point of view, is that there is many labels, and of course there is a risk of that's the least let's say the least let's say ambitious one are hidden the best one. So there is some kind of competitive disadvantage for the ones who are making the best effort, because it's not readable. And also the fourth problem that has been identified by the study is a tendency also of a fragmentation of the market, of the internal market, due to the fact that most of these labels on animal welfare are nationally based. It's due to a number of reasons. Sometimes it's because the welfare claim are associated with other claims, like coming from local produce or something like this. But it's also a structural issue in the sense that most of the control structure and the registration structure are really nationally based, and it's very difficult to export. And finally, the last issue that has been pointed out is the fact that there is no fair competition with imports. So it's quite difficult, in particular for all EU producers to be in competition because with the imported products, because there is no, as you probably know, there is no way for imported products to be compliant. I mean, there is no obligation legally to be compliant with the EU standards. So that's also one of the weaknesses. Next slide, please. So what are the options that was been listed in the Inception Impact Assessment? The first one is about regulating animal welfare claims. So the model of this approach would be a bit like the health claims approach, means that we try to frame, let's say, the claims that exist today, Like, for example, if you say happy cows, what does it mean? So on. So have a harmonized approach of claims, specific or generic claims. The second one is about a label that would be limited to cage or non-cage systems. Right? And this you have two sub-options, compulsory or voluntary. And another one that would be more comprehensive, so not limited to housing systems. That could be also compulsory or voluntary. It could be single or multi-tier. It means that there would be only yes or no system or a system of grades or different qualities, like it exists for eggs or for Bet11 or the Danish system, for example. And the other thing is that it has to be in line with the sustainable food labeling. As you probably know, there is also in the Farm to Fork a commitment to provide a sustainable food framework system, including labeling. Next slide, please. So I just want to conclude my presentation about clarifying what means mandatory labeling. It looks a bit obvious, but I saw during the discussion with stakeholders that sometimes there is some kind of confusion. So a mandatory labeling is a system of evaluation and communication. So it's a label, basically, that all products on the market, including imported ones, are covered by the label. So it's not really a label as such, it's more a scoring system. It has always different levels, it's multi-tier, and it could be descriptive, so relatively just bound, for example, for eggs, or it could express a judgment or an evaluation comparing to the others, like A+, B, and so on. I give the two examples here, the marking of eggs that you're probably familiar with, like where it's purely descriptive and does not make any judgment. It's a organic, free-range, barn, or cage. Or you have something that is more for household appliances. It's also mandatory. And you're probably familiar if you have bought one day a fridge or whatever, a washing machine. And you see that there is a grading system here that is mandatory. And so the consumer can know exactly how much the energy is consumed. So that's the next slide, please. What is voluntary? So it's the same system, but you have much more different variations. It could be, it's only covering, of course, only the operators and the product that adhere to the scheme. So the basic products are not necessarily covered. And it could be one system, single tier, or it could be with different levels. And it could be descriptive, like organic is descriptive, or it could be a system of evaluation, so judgmental. And you have different variation here. It could be single tier, like it's a yes or no system, like eco-label, the EU eco-label, or the organic, for example. Or it could be multi-tier, which is only focused on upgraded levels. Is the case, for example, for the Danish schemes, you know, the better dyrevelfærd, or where not all systems are covered. It's only the good ones that are using the label. And it could be multi-tier with all levels, like the Nutri-Score that is used in France, for example, or Haltungsform, which it tried to cover all the product on place. So that's all the different things. And that's next slide, please. It's just to show you that there are different labels that are on the market. So you have, for example, here Bet11 in Netherlands. You have the Étiquette Bien-être Animal in France. You have Benestar Animal. We have two different labels, for example, in Spain. So there are really, really a lot of labels available today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Simonin, for this very useful and interesting presentation. And it's really good to see that we are progressing in the determination of what we want to use. And also, thank you very much for the clarification of the terms and the options and the possibilities that we have. So really encouraging also your presentation. So I come down to now sitting on my left. This is Mrs. Claudia Salzborn, who will present the need for a mandatory system of production and labeling for animal products at the EU level, using Germany's system of production labeling as possible as an example. So Mrs. Claudia Salzborn is expert at the Academy for Animal Welfare of the Deutscher Tierschutzbund. So welcome in our Intergroup of Animal Welfare. You have the floor, please.
Ja, also ich bedanke mich ganz herzlich für die Einladung.
Thank you for the invitation and the chance to speak to you today. So I will report on our experience in Germany and I'll tell you about some of the recent developments. In Germany, there is a voluntary system. Could the chairwoman turn her microphone off, please? We can hear her paperwork. Could the chair turn her microphone off, please? We can hear her shuffling paper. And now they are working on labelling, and it is going to be included in the agreement. The interest in how animals are dealt with in farming and so on, and people are more and more interested in that, and that's not just the case for Germany. And what we're seeing is that the consumers are interested in how the animals in agriculture are doing, and they're concerned about their conditions. We're hearing that there is interest in buying products that are from situations where you have good animal welfare. We can see this from the eco barometers as well. People are interested in buying organic products, and they're doing that because they know that the animal welfare standards are much higher as well. And then there are the farmers as well. They want to be able to benefit from this added value as well if they're doing more to meet higher standards. And they want to be able to show that as well. Next slide, please. So what is the benefit of an animal welfare labelling? And what are the criteria? Well, firstly, transparency for the consumer. So the consumer can see what you have in a product, and they should then be able to have the chance to make that conscious decision. Yes, animal welfare costs money, and so if you're going to make that investment, then it has a cost, but that investment can generate added value, and then you can actually get a higher return because people can understand why a product costs more. And labeling can help producers and retailers to seize market opportunities and to improve their image. And it can also pave the way for more animal welfare products in the market. And that would also increase motivation on farms and so on, because you would find these animal welfare products on the shelves. Next slide, please. And in the group for animal welfare, well, we've been looking at EU labelling for a long time. We've got members from different countries. They have their own different labelling initiatives. They've got their own individual labels. Sometimes it's state labelling. Sometimes it's labelling by private companies. You've got Better Leven in the Netherlands, for example. And we've got a lot of experience here. So we've pooled that experience. And you need to look at the requirements and the needs as well. And it's going to be a challenge if you're going to have an EU-wide label, because of course you already have different requirements in different member states. And maybe the needs are different in the different countries as well. And we wanted to focus on what the core points will be if we're going to be calling for an EU label and what the minimum requirements would be. It needed to be mandatory. Really, you'd need to make sure that all of the animal products have some sort of labeling. It needs to be set down as a legal minimum. It should be multi-tiered so that it can fit into the different parts of the market. And you really need to say that you have to have the labeling so that you can talk about animal welfare. And if you're talking about animal welfare, you have to include all stages of production. So that would involve rearing, breeding, slaughter, and so on. You need to think about the different indicators. And we've got some indicators which would let you know how that system works. Data has been collected right along the chain about the quality of the meat and so on. And you can put all of that data into it and you can see what the animal welfare conditions are. And then finally, it must include all animals. So all farmed species, terrestrial, fish, aquaculture, fish from the sea as well. And it should also include imported products as well. Next slide, please. So in Germany, in the coalition agreement, they have said that there will be state-driven labelling this year. The aim is to make the German farming system future-proof, and this is supposed to be one part of the whole structure. So what are we looking at here? Well, on the 7th of June, our Minister Tim Erskine presented this. It's going to be a mandatory kind of labelling, but then you will have voluntary labelling for imports. That will be an option. They're going to start with fresh pig meat. It will then also include frozen, processed products and so on afterwards. And it's going to cover all kinds of food that come from meat produced in Germany and then sold to the German consumer. So we're going to start with the food retail and wholesale, a service counter, specialist shops, and then also online trade. Other types of service, such as gastronomy and out-of-home catering, will be covered later. And at the moment, they're looking at the productive phase of the animal's life. So when it comes to animals, you're thinking about the fattening period. So it is then also going to be the case that you'll look at the period where they're producing milk as well, and not necessarily before or after when you're looking at a milk product. Transport and slaughter will not be included, but there is a plan to raise those legal standards. Now that is a bit of a pity because animal welfare is very important when it comes to those points as well. That needs to be mentioned. But when it comes to labelling for premium products and so on, well, then maybe you could set higher requirements. And that would then raise the standards in the law. But maybe it's not something that could be achieved. And these processes can be quite slow and long then. Next slide, please. So what will this label look like? Well, it's going to be a legal standard. You would say it's organic. It will have several tiers. You have the stable level, for example. We've got legal minimum standards on that in Germany. Then you have stable and more space. So that means they have 20% more space. And then there are a few other requirements, for example, how the pig pens would be. You can pick some criteria here. Then you'll have outdoor climate, and that means they've got more space as well, and they have permanent access to the outdoor climate. So that also means that you need to think about the temperature as well, but climate covers more than just temperature. So you need to have at least one side of the stable open so that they have contact with the climate outdoors. Then we have outdoor run and free range. So these are actually two tiers combined, and there you have even more space. They have to be outside at least 8 hours a day. And so there aren't really specific conditions about the stables and so on under that criteria, but it's more about the space they have outdoors. And then you have the last level, which is organic, and that's EU organic legislation. Then we have the controls. And so the farms need to be registered by the competent authorities. They'll get an ID number, and that is used then on the animal right until it reaches the shelf. And so this means that the authorities can carry out their controls and so on. And the same will apply to foreign products as well. I forgot to mention that earlier. This will be binding for the German products, but you can also register imports as well if they meet exactly the same requirements. And then you can use that label. And so if it if you want to do that in Germany, you need to get that done under the relevant competent authority. You need to register with the right authority. And of course, that gets a bit more complicated whenever it comes to doing the controls and checking what's happening abroad. But in principle, it would be possible. Next slide, please. So what is the assessment here? It will be mandatory. It's a very important requirement here when it comes to animal welfare, not only in Germany, but also in the Eurogroup. That's the main demand here, and that's been met. The minimum standards need to be something that are known, and then you can have it on premium products and on organic products, and it's important that all of the criteria are met. Imported products can be included. And so if a product is not labeled, it means that the product isn't from Germany, and it means therefore you can spot which products are imported. So this will apply to pig meat, but they are also coming up with the plans for other kinds of species. So it should be extended to the other kinds of animals and to processed products as well. And also the other kinds of services I mentioned earlier, like out-of-home catering. Next slide, please. So what criteria have not been met then? Well, it does not include the entire chain. And this means then you're only really looking at a very small snapshot of the animal welfare. So breeding, rearing, transport and slaughter are not included. Animal welfare indicators are missing as well. And so if it's going to be outdoor or free range, well, you really need to know exactly what is happening to the animals, and there are still some risks there. And so it's very important to make sure that you have those animal welfare indicators included. And then there's another point that we're critical of, and that concerns the two ways of identifying the conditions, so the location and the climate. And it doesn't really tell you much about the actual animal welfare. So you might have the stable that meets certain conditions, but then maybe you would have tail docking, which is basically a ban, but it still is happening. And it's happening because of the conditions that the animals are being kept in. So you're only getting a very vague kind of ranking here. And the consumer doesn't really know exactly what is there in that product. That's one major point of criticism. And then there is the control system. So you've got the ID number, it's passed on, and then all of this is going to be done by industry, and then it will be subject to the authorities' controls. And maybe they only happen every 10 years on some of the farms. So it means, well, really, here we'd like to see our own a specific control system for that. And when it comes to the import products, if they're going to be registered voluntarily and labelled voluntarily, you've got a question here about how you can actually implement that. How can you apply sanctions? So if someone violates the rules, then there are penalties and fines and so on. But what do you do in the case of imported products? There are a lot of questions there. And then it's a bit of a problem here when it comes to the actual designations. People have all sorts of different ideas of what the word stable means, for example. So maybe you need to say this is the legal minimum standard, and then intuitively use specific terms as you move up through the different tiers. So it's going to start with pig meat and fresh pig meat, and it's very, very limited therefore. So of course, yes, you need to do things step by step, but I think it's important to make sure that we do this quickly so that people can trust it. Because if you just hear about it and you only see a few products here and there, then that does have an impact. So it's going to be important to make sure that these things are available relatively quickly. So the range needs to be extended quickly. You also need to have an information campaign and so on, because that's very important. And it was very important for the organic label as well. It's important that consumers know, and it's important that they can understand it. And we don't really understand what was going on with this extra organic level, because you already have traditional production which may have higher standards than some of these organic production. So there shouldn't really be any sort of ranking here, but if you look at minimum standard and then you do see the rank, you do see that there is some sort of tier here. And you already have the organic labeling, so that can be done separately. And so you do need to be able to communicate clearly when it comes to that organic level. So we don't think it's necessary specifically here. Next slide, please. So what are the other important points? What do I want to say here as well? Well, there are lots of different labels at the moment, and it's not easy to have a good overview. So what we do really want to have is a functioning program. And you need to be able to look at the different selling points. And as I said earlier, you've got different labels which were set up voluntarily, and then you have labels ranked according to different criteria. But unfortunately, something else that's happening is that you need to make sure that there isn't a race to the bottom. You need to make sure that trade doesn't say, well, I just want to offer the outdoor climate, that looks very good, I'll commit to that, and then they only meet a few of these low requirements. But then you have other programs which are very complicated, they have more requirements and they're more expensive. And other people are coming along offering something with a much lower level of requirement. So we need to have these ambitious standards, we need to have the control systems, and you need to be able to communicate about these unique selling points. Because otherwise you're going to have a lot of competition, it's going to be a race to the bottom, and the actual animal welfare that already exists may be reduced. Animal welfare is also a major sustainability issue, but it shouldn't just be watered down into a sustainability level. A lot of these products are being consumed, and animal welfare needs to be part of the debate, but it shouldn't just be watered down in that bigger debate. So this is why we want to have the special labelling. So that's the mandatory labelling, where you have the different categories. And so labelling itself isn't necessarily a game changer. In Germany, this is going to be integrated into the general animal production strategies. And when it came to eggs, for example, that's had an impact. The cage hen eggs are no longer sold at all. So if you go to a German supermarket, you find organic, free range, and so on. You do not find any cage hen eggs. And so that's what's happened. People can make a choice, and that's why it's very important to introduce this kind of thing. Thank you.
Vielen Dank an Sie, Claudia Salzborn. Das war sehr, sehr, sehr interessant. And
that was very, very interesting.
To English again, and I'm open now the floor for questions and a remark. I have already Anja Hazekamp and Sarah. I write you down. I will take you out. I start with Anja Hazekamp, and then of course the others, and of course also those online can raise their little yellow hand if they want. But Anja, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Tilly. Yes, I'm sitting here a little bit with mixed feelings. When I look at all these presentations about animal welfare labeling, I'm always getting a little bit confused. And I was wondering, Claudia, the thing that you propose for Germany, is it linked to, for instance, the Tierschutzbund? Where I ask this because in the Netherlands we have the Beter Leven, which is also mentioning the dierenbescherming. So the Dutch Society for the Protection of Animals. And I noticed that a lot of people think that when they buy the lowest star, so just 1 star, they think that they are buying something wonderful for the animals. Well, in fact, it's just intensive farming. It's factory farming with a little bit of enrichment. But when you go look, it doesn't make a huge impact. And these people think that they are buying something that is approved by this organization. So I was wondering, will the Tierschutzbund be on the label as well? Because I think people can get confused. And I just want to make one remark about why I'm so confused is because I really think that when you have this one, the first, the lowest standard, so the absolute minimum, I'm wondering whether you should, in fact, give it an improvement, because I think the best thing would be to add another level at the end. So, because I think the best thing you can do for an animal, from an animal point of view, is not kill it and not eat it. So I really doubt that animal-friendly meat exists. I don't believe in that system. But could you say something about that, to leave the first tier and go to another one for non-animal products?
Do you want to react immediately, or do you want us to take some more
Ist
questions?
vielleicht einfacher, dann
Einfacher? Okay.
Ja, wenn das in Ordnung ist. Okay. Ja, also der gesetzliche
So these legal minimum standards, if I've understood correctly, well, firstly, there is the risk here that the consumer thinks, great, there's a label. That is good, of course. So it's very good to have information of consumer. And then when you look at the standards, if you have the labels and the standards at national level or EU level, well, then it does make the distinction then between products from the country or from the EU, from those imports. So they can make the distinction here between imported products or EU products if you're using an EU label. And of course, you can have the concept here where you start at one point and then you extend it. But there is a risk here, because then you need to look at what the standards are behind it, and then maybe it's seen more as an advert and not about providing transparency. So you do need to have the structure the way you have for Beter Leven in the Netherlands, for example. And of course, we do want those individual labels which have been on the market for a while. We've been involved for 10 years now, for example. We need to make sure that they don't get lost entirely, unless the state label is as good as those animal welfare labels. So, but of course, the main point here is the animal welfare point.
Es fehlt die Frage, ob Sie von Anja das erste, ob Sie das mit.
So, the first question here was about the names for the labeling. So the state label, yes, we are providing support, and I didn't want to get into all of the details here. We just wanted to mention our criticism of some of the system here. But if you read the actual legislation, it's a bit more complex, but we do welcome the fact that this has been proposed and that it will be mandatory, but it doesn't cover the entire chain. So what does that really tell the consumer? So yes, we would be quite critical on many points. We do hope that there will be many improvements made. We're not the only ones with those concerns, but let's see what happens.
So, sorry. Ja, ich habe also erstmal vielen Dank für.
Firstly, thank you very much for that wonderful presentation. It was very, very informative. And I think that most of us here will probably agree with your assessment. But I do have a few comments I'd like to make. So I would like to see the minimum standards in law as well. And we know that for pigs, that the rules aren't being followed. So there is some of the tail docking as well. So what happens then when you realise that these minimum standards are not actually being respected? I mean, I find this really tricky. So the third level meant that you could just stick your nose out doors, and that's enough. Well, I think that's really quite scandalous. I mean, we don't need to get into that in detail, but there's another thing that annoys me. You're saying that organic shouldn't be done this way. I am an organic farmer, and we've got our own slaughterhouse, we've got our own butchers, we rear the animals. So what would your alternative proposal be? Because there isn't any, there's nothing that's stricter elsewhere than it is in the organic sector. What requirements aren't being met, but they are actually being done in different associations? So I think it is a bit questionable if you say that you shouldn't have that tier. Yes, I understand there are traditional farmers who perhaps might even be better than many organic farmers, but maybe there could be a compromise here. You could say organic / I don't know, something else. But to not include organic, which actually already does a lot more when it comes to the feed, the environmental services, and so on. Well, I mean, I don't want to see that either. You're just saying it's only about animals, it's only about meat, and the other shouldn't be involved. Well, then maybe just very briefly, I can go back to that legal standard. So the difference here is that you would praise certain things and say this is animal welfare, this is good, this is better, or else you do it neutrally. So you're going to have to take a decision here. But if it's to be better, well, then those standards, those requirements don't. But we need to have the minimum standard set down in law, not just say it's barn or stable or whatever. This is the very basic level that we need to have. And then on organic, well, the EU organic legislation really has the highest animal welfare standards that exist in law. But there are traditional farmers and labels that have higher standards. And the organic associations themselves sometimes have higher standards as well. We've got a few in Germany, for example. And so it means there hasn't been standardization here. In the German draft for the animal labeling, well, if you have organic certification and checks have been done and it's all safe, then you can say it is organic. You can put that on the label. There are organic farmers who don't have that label, but then they would fall into the outdoor and free range category. So organic and free range or outdoor are very similar. And then you also need to look at the feed as well. So if you've got the organic label on it, you're still communicating something. So it is a bit of a ranking here. And I don't think you can necessarily say that it should have a separate tier, because a lot of the organic stuff is already covered in the free range and so on. But then other criteria aren't met whenever it comes to different conditions. So if you have organic separate, I'm not really sure you can scientifically justify that, because you do have programs, you've got Neuland and so on, for example, and there are those links. So yes, I think you could just then add the organic label as well, and then have another new additional one as well, and that would be communicating information. So it would be very clear. You would have one and the other.
Dann schnell das Wort der Manuela. Ich weiß nämlich, sie muss gehen. Und
Because I know she needs to leave, and then Ulrike needs to leave as well. So I would like to give them the floor and ask the questions quickly together. Manuela.
Also ich kann ein bisschen bleiben, wenn Ulrike vorher will, dann...
I can stay a bit longer if Ulrike needs to leave earlier. Yeah, okay.
Vielen, vielen Dank. Als erstes für die ganzen Ausführungen, auch die Debatte hier.
And thank you for the debate here in this group as well. It's very important for me too. I do support mandatory labeling because I know, so not just as a farmer, I know that we already have these very intensive controls and so on. And then you have these controls carried out by trade. We're meeting various different silver standards. There are checks. It's very similar to what you have for the organic checks. The animals need to have enough space and so on. You need to meet various criteria. And so I think, well, I would not be in favor of setting up a separate control system because I think that, well, from a German perspective here, I think that we already have a comprehensive control system and that it is working. And they look at criteria such as antibiotic use and so on. And if those figures come out too high, then you get another automatic control. You also have the risk controls as well. Bavaria, for example, has added in another higher level as well. So I think it's okay. Yes, I support mandatory labeling. That's something that we could use. It's good for us to know where our products and meat come from. And it would be clear that there would be added value for the consumer. But I have a question here. Well, does the farmer get a better price for this? And who would be financing all of this? What currently happens at the moment, because we're seeing prices rise in the energy sector, in the food sector, and we're seeing that the organic products are being left on the shelves here. Consumption is down, people are counting the pennies. And I think that this state label is actually coming too late in the day because trade is already much further on. They're already saying you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. So trade and industry are already much further down the road than what we're discussing here. And the question is it worth it for the farmer? Will they benefit? So yes, well, I would slightly have a different position when it comes to the controls. And you've got that with organic. So you have those very strict requirements for organic, and you have that certification program as well. It is standardized and it really is something that makes organic different. Now, the other controls that you mentioned, well, those authority ones quite often look at cross-compliance, medicines use and so on. That's different. But when it comes to actual animal welfare controls, it's different. In Bavaria, I think maybe a farm is only checked every 30 years. That's kind of the average, perhaps. So I think this could perhaps be developed. Maybe you could make sure that the animal welfare checks are covered better, because quite often it's just about cross-compliance. So from my perspective, when it comes to animal welfare, well, not enough is being done yet. Then when it comes to trade and industry and so on, well, and the retailers, well, okay, they're saying, yes, you've got this label. This is what you can get in the shops. This is what can be sold at a certain level. And for each system, you have different criteria and you cannot compare them. You have to say that. So I think we need to have more ambitious standards. But the ones with the more ambitious standards will disappear because actually people will look, okay, this one's cheaper, but it's cheaper because they're checking less. And this is the crux of the matter here. You need to have a mechanism to make sure that that sort of thing doesn't happen. So you mentioned the controls. Oh, yes, the farmers. What about them? Yes, well, I think that this sort of labelling should be there to make sure that the price of this and the cost of this can be passed on. So there are higher standards. Animal welfare costs money and it needs to be paid for. The farmer cannot simply just do it like that. You know, and perhaps I get very cross here about the retailers, because you've got price dumping, they've got those very cheap offers and so on to get people into the shops, and people just get the impression that nothing is worth anything and they throw so much away as well. But maybe this could change things. Maybe actually the current situation means that people are more conscious about what they're doing. But if you don't have a reliable labeling, then it's more difficult for the farmers to say, I'm doing something better, so I should get more money for it. And that is the difference here with private, with the industries label and so on. Well, maybe people go, oh, I might not really trust it so much. But if it was the state that had the labeling, then I think maybe you might have more chance here that the price could be passed on. the last question from Manuel Riba, and I think we have a couple more. Manuel, you have the floor. So it's my turn, finally. Well, yes, I do agree. We need a mandatory label, and of course, we need EU standard labeling. That's very, very important. And so I'm very pleased that the Commission wants to present something. Is the Commission still there? Are you still there online? Yes, says the chairwoman. So I've got two questions for him. So it's very, very important that the Commission does propose a label. It should have several tiers. It should cover the entire chain. Yes, I agree. And it should cover all animals as well. But the one thing I think is missing, the one thing that hasn't been said, is that there should be one single label, because we've got so many different confusing labels, especially in German. I am surprised. I was in the shop recently and I saw a big green label with a tick, and it says good animals, and then it had only a rank level 1 when it came to the stable. But you know, I just come along and I maybe see the tick and it's green and I think, excellent, fine, I'll take it. But what's the plan? Well, I hope that they'll get rid of that label in Germany, because actually they have animals in huge numbers as well. And then secondly, when you have a label, you need to do it right from the very start. You shouldn't adopt the bad labels. And unfortunately, that's the case in Germany, because a lot of people don't know this. In Germany, there wasn't any action taken by the politicians. The discounters started to put on pressure. So actually we need to have 1, 2, 3, 4. So in Germany, 1, well, you're told in school, when you get 1, that's the best mark. But actually in this system in Germany, 1 actually means that you have animals kept in large numbers. So it's very, very misleading. So look at the sort of criticism that already exists in the member states when it comes to those labels. We need to do it right from the very start. We shouldn't just adopt the wrong kind of labels. And so that's what I had been understanding. I had been understanding that our agriculture minister in Germany wanted to stick to that 1, 2, 3, 4 category because people had got used to it. But we really shouldn't just take on something because people are used to it if it's actually misleading. What about the price? Well, consumers, okay, they will know it's going to cost more. Animal welfare costs more. But you need to know that consumers would be prepared to pay more, but they need to be able to understand what they're buying. 90% apparently would be prepared to pay more. But that's my criticism here with this kind of labelling, because we're not actually achieving that at all with the current system. So it needs to be made simpler. You need to raise visibility. Wouldn't it maybe be better if you actually have a photo or a picture on the packaging of the kind of conditions the animals are kept in? You know, maybe if you saw a horrible picture, you'd think, I don't support that, I won't buy that, but you would then spend more if you knew that the animal welfare was better. Look at what we did with cigarettes and packaging there. Those images really work and have an impact. It's clear the consumers don't want mass animal production. So we need to show that. And if you show them that, then you'll see a quick change, because politics takes too long and sometimes the decisions aren't the right ones. So we need to do it right from the very start. And don't adopt the bad models.
Manuela Riva, I see the time is running. We have only 5 minutes left because interpretation is until 11 o'clock, and I really want to respect that. So if it's okay, I would ask our both experts to give written answers to the question of Manuela. It was also a lot of input, and I'm very happy, I must say, that the members here are so committed to this topic. So it's a very important topic. So thanks again to the 2 experts that were here, because I want also that Sarah has the possibility to present her proposal, and we have Pascal Durand, who has also to say something today. So first, Sarah Wiener, related to the topic.
Thank you so much for the floor. Ganz kurz, also ich möchte gern die Arbeitsgruppe Animal Welfare Labeling in Stichpunkten
present this point about labeling. I have to be very, very brief here because we don't have much time left. So I idea here is that the Commission is going to present this text on labelling, and we know that the Commission has a labelling subgroup in the Animal Welfare EU platform, and various options should be assessed, and I think that we need to respond to that, and the results will be ready by the end of the year. So this is a big debate, and I think that we need to make a contribution. So I therefore suggest that we have a subgroup for labelling. I'd like to volunteer for that, and I would like to ask for your support to become the chair of that group. Now, of course, I do think we need to have mandatory labelling, and I think that we should cover all animals. As was already said, we should have the multi-tiered system. And of course, something that I think is very important is that we also need to look at processed products as well. You need to have the entire chain from breeding right through to slaughter too. That's something that's missing. You need a harmonized approach. You were saying that we shouldn't have 100,000 different kinds of labels. Yes, so we need to work on that. And I'd like to work on that with other people who as well, and I'd like to chair that subgroup. And the idea here would be to draft a position paper, a manifesto as it were, to say what we want, what we think is a good idea, what is perhaps missing and which should be included. So that's why I would like to ask for your support if you think it is a good, important thing to do. And thank you.
Ravina, a very good initiative, just as we are speaking about definition and words. So it's a working group on labeling of not a subgroup, because the rules does not really foresee that, but it's a working group. And but it's a content that is very important. So thank you very much, Sarah, for this initiative. And I hope a lot of people will join, and that we have then a very strong paper with all the inputs and the experts that we can still connect with. And thank you very again to our two experts. That was so interesting. I really think we need more time for our animal welfare. 1.5 hours would be probably more appropriate. So I will work also on that. But thank you very much, Sarah, again for this initiative. I think it's great and very appropriate that we do that now. And then I give the floor. So I'm very happy to welcome my colleague Pascal Durand today, who the board has nominated as a candidate for vice president of the Animal Welfare Intergroup. Indeed, as you know, Manuel Bompard, I think, joined the government in France. So we really needed, again, a French vice president in the Intergroup. And voilà, and I'm very happy he used to be vice president already, and to welcome him back. But I give the floor immediately to Pascal Durand for presenting, saying a few words. Please, Pascal.
Merci beaucoup, Tilly. Très très rapidement aussi pour respecter le
I know that we've got to respect interpreters' working conditions. I know that some people know me. I was already vice chair in the previous term. So I'm very committed. And I just simply want to say, because I know that this surprised a number of people, in particular Anya, the fact that I didn't apply at the very beginning of the term, and that was just because of, well, I just didn't feel this was right, because I changed group and I found myself elected in a group in a country where animal rights were considerably neglected, and I felt uncomfortable, personally speaking. I didn't really feel that I could be the representative. I couldn't be a representative of animal voice in animal rights, and at the same time be a member of the group I was a member of. But things have changed considerably, and thanks to the work of our members, because often MEPs are pretty much looked down upon in France. But once again, I feel that I'm able to go into battle again, and I think that my environment is where I work in is less hostile to animal rights, and so I think I can take up this job again, and I'm very happy that you've placed your trust in me to be able to take up this post, and it really gives me enormous pleasure to work again at your sides. Thank you very much, Pascal Durand, and really it's all mutual, and we're all terribly happy that you're going to be someone who has a long experience here. And
Information, if everybody agrees on that. So thank you very much. And I have a little bit a bad conscience because I did not give the floor back at all now to the Commission. So I will now leave the conclusions word to Mr. Simonin, if he wants, in English, because the interpreters have the right to stop since 2 minutes. But if he wants to say some last words, please, you can have the floor. Thank you, and thank you to everybody for joining. Please, Monsieur Simonin.
Thank you very much, Mr. I think that I'm very happy that the intergroup is making a working group on that topic, and I think that's my conclusion would be that I'm very keen to contribute to any information you would need to help for your reflection and your position paper. That's it.
That's an important message. Thank you very much, and thank you to all of you. Have a good day, a good come back to your constituency or to Brussels. See you. Bye-bye. Thanks.